Welcome to the Rooted in Light podcast. I'm your host, Tuesday Rivera, and I am here today with Dr. Magdalena Red, who I call Maggie, and I think most people call her Maggie. But Magdalena Red, I like to start there because that's when Maggie first came to one of my programs. At the bottom it said Magdalena Red. I was like, what is happening? Who has that name? And who is this person who just kind of lit up the screen and was always leaning in and bringing all of these insights and different ways of looking at things. And so Maggie and I were fortunate enough to get to work together after being in one of my programs. And she has launched herself into the world as an astrologer. And or is it astrologist?
Astrologer. Yeah.
Astrologer. Is
Mhm.
astrologist a word, Maggie?
Not one that I know of. Everyone I
Oh,
know in this world says astrologer, but I like making up words, so I think that's
okay.
totally fine.
Great. Well, here's, I think, what people on the podcast probably know. I am completely um, enamored of astrology, and yet I feel like I don't get it. So it's like this thing that I love, and I'm like, do I understand it? I'm not sure. So, friends, I was lucky enough that Maggie gave me a reading prior to this podcast. So I have a sense of how she works. And the reason I wanted to have Maggie on specifically is I thought Maggie is the kind of person who can explain things to me. And so when I get a little lost down the astrology rabbit hole and I'm like, I don't know who to listen to. I don't know what to think. Maggie has been consistently someone who can kind of straighten me out or help me figure out what's going on or tell me what I need to understand about astrology. So, Maggie, what else might you say by way of introduction?
Ooh, thank you so much, Tuesday, for having me on. It's such an honor, and I'm excited for the conversation. And I think the first thing I'll say is that I really do try to be a translator of this
Hmm.
system that is really a complex language. And so I love that introduction because it really speaks to why I do this and I think the style that I take to astrology and to practicing astrology. In terms of introduction, one thing to know is that I am a Scorpio with lots of Scorpio placements, and I claim the Scorpio mantle. So, this kind of question is very difficult for me to answer because I don't like the
Oh,
spotlight and I would prefer to be off on the side, just observing things. But I do love depth and intensity, and I anticipate that that is what we will have in our conversation today.
well, it's never been anything but that. So I would anticipate that too. Okay, Maggie, let's dive right in. Since you're an astrologer and you just owned being a Scorpio and you've done my chart, I'm a Taurus. I am Leo rising. I don't remember my moon because I forget it every single time. But I wanted to ask, did you do a reading for this show? Or like, did you do a reading to prepare? And or what might you anticipate with a Scorpio and a Taurus coming together on a podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did not do a reading for this show, but I did do a reading for myself to check the transits. So, the way that I use astrology, kind of on a personal level, is to really look at what is happening in the sky at a given time so that we
Uh-huh.
can see how what is happening in the sky is in relationship to what is in our natal birth chart. And so I look at my birth chart, I look to see what's going on, and that is a practice that I'm in regularly. So I just like to see sort of what's going on globally and then what's going on globally that could impact me on a personal level because there are planets that have impact on us individually and there are planets that are not really touching us at a given time. That's why there's always so much going on, but we may or may not feel it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what did you learn when you did a reading for yourself around this particular time together?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm not sure when this will air, but today is a full moon. And we have a full moon in Libra, and we're in Aries season. So the sun is in Aries and the moon is in Libra. And right now they're directly across from each other. That's what makes it a full moon. And that's how you can see a full moon in a birth chart. So you have these energies that are pulling in opposite directions. And I also have a lot of Libra in my chart, and having a full moon in Libra is very illuminating of me today. So I'm having to just like put aside my little uh, Scorpio-ness of not wanting to be in the spotlight and understand that sometimes we are meant to be seen and we're meant to
Uh-huh.
shine in the ways that we are meant to shine. That's one of the things I saw.
Great. Well, I love that. I mean, like that makes a lot of sense to me coming onto a podcast. And I'm not exactly sure when this will air, but I know that it's interesting because you're quite accomplished, Maggie, right? So, I introduced you as Dr. Magdalena Red. So you've got a PhD. You've worked in academic settings. You have led teams. You've done organizational development. You have a background working in equity and racial justice. And I'm curious, was there a moment where that way of working or even profession like cracked open for you? Like it could feel like a leap to have done that kind of work and now to be putting out your shingle as an astrologer. And so can you tell me about, was there a crack there? Was the break? How did you begin to kind of turn yourself toward astrology? And was there anything in your chart that might have said that that's what you should do?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It sure does feel like a hard left turn sometimes. And I am delighted to say that it feels really good. And so I think that while it definitely is a huge departure, that I feel more aligned and fulfilled and
Hmm.
integrated than in my previous parts of life, chapters of life.
Okay.
Um, that said, I do think that the academic background, the social justice work, the lots and lots of time spent in contemplating this world in a very material way has definitely been supportive of the work that I do now. I feel like academic training has is very much a part of how I do astrology. I
Huh.
am very much a dork in astrology. So I do
Okay.
have placements in my chart that do indicate nerding out and like deep dives into information and gathering lots of information,
Uh-huh.
connecting lots of dots, but needing that depth, needing the sort of rigor of academia. And I've applied that in how I've learned astrology and how I practice and how I continue to learn astrology because it's an ancient
Mm.
practice with many lineages and many different influences and a huge evolution over 3,000 years of practice almost. And that is all worth studying and it's all worth learning about
Mhm.
and being kind of conscious of. And so I think that connects back to the academic background. In terms of whether or not there was like a moment where I was like, this is what I'm going to do, there was not. It was
Ah, okay.
definitely a moment when I decided that I was burnt out on academia and I felt pretty betrayed by the promise of education. I'm a first generation college student and um, I just kind of got burned in a few different ways in the institution, within the institution, and quit without knowing what I was going to do next. And then just
Wow.
started doing all kinds of exploration. And I had Akashic record readings, and I did the Enneagram, and I did disc assessments, and I did human design, and I did,
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
tried lots of
Great.
things. I sampled from the smorgasbord.
And so how did you land on astrology as being your path? Because I think that's exactly what we talk about in Luminosity and my other programs. We talk about like follow the signals. Like if you have an interest, go after it and trust that you will land in a place, right? You might have to do a lot of sampling and try a lot of things, but it's not wasted. It's actually you're learning along the way. But then when you kind of find your thing or your multiple things, like something will settle in you and you'll kind of have a sense that that's the path. And so can you talk about kind of like from going wide to trying lots of things and figuring out what it was for you to being comfortable enough to say like for now this is what it is.
Yeah. I think so. Part of what happened was that I was getting lots and lots of messages repeated during the smorgasbord sampling.
Aha.
And that was really helpful because what I was doing was I had become really aware that in my early 30s, I didn't know myself very. Did I say 30s? Early
You
40s.
did.
In my
Aha.
early 40s, I didn't know myself very well. And I had
Yeah.
sort of followed this academic path because it was what I thought I was supposed to do. I was taking the next step because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get the promotion and go on to the next thing. And I was doing all of that and feeling really kind of, I guess, alienated from myself. And so
Mm.
when I
Aha.
stopped that practice and started trying new things, one of the things that I was really intent on was how do I come to know myself better? And
Great.
sampling from that smorgasbord was very helpful. One of the things that became clear was that that the answers were in me and that I needed some new language to try to kind of get to know myself. And astrology was of the many paths, it was the path that held the most clarity and nuance for me and
Aha.
really felt like it revealed myself to myself the more that I started diving into it and getting to know different things. And
Great.
so I see it as one of many sort of paths to self realization and to self knowing. And I really appreciate it for that. And then, yes, there are some indicators in my chart that show that I could do this work. Not that it could be in lots of different ways, but that this
Aha.
work of helping to lead other people to knowing themselves is kind of part of my purpose.
I really like that. And I remembering in the reading you did for me when we were talking about uh your sun sign, I believe, and listeners, you just have to like really be kind to me because I have a terrible memory and I love this stuff, but sometimes I just like mess up the language. So I think it was your sun sign you're saying is the youiest you.
The rising sign.
The rising sign is the youiest you.
Yes.
And I want to know what that means, why your rising sign, because we all hear about our sun signs, right?
Right.
Like that's the one where you go online and you see when you were born and like they have something for people once a month or whatever. And so you look at your sun sign and you're like, I'm a Taurus, and that's me. But my rising sign is a Leo, and you've said that's your youiest you. And so can you explain what a rising sign is and why that's your youiest you?
Yes. Thank you. This is so important for us to know. Um, Sun signs became really popular in the late 1900s. A newspaper publication wanted to have something to publish regularly to engage readership. And so they started doing this
Okay.
sun sign thing. So it's been very popular throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century. But in ancient and traditional astrology, and even in modern astrology, all of us are sort of obsessed with the rising sign. So the rising sign is the zodiacal sign that was on the eastern horizon the moment you were born. And it's very specific to the minute that you were born. So the location and the time in which you were born. So it has the sun sign is just a period of 28 days in the year that the sun is in a certain zodiacal sign. The rising is specific to your location and to your birth time. So it is very, very specific. And I see it as the time that your soul chose to emerge into this world,
Hmm.
embodied and fully inhabiting this earthly plane, if you will. And so that's why I say it's the youiest you. It's the sign that is most associated with kind of what your soul is rising to do in this lifetime. It may be very different from your sun sign. So, in your case, as a Leo rising, it's a fire sign. It is the height of summer. Taurus is an earth sign. It's kind of thought of as part of the springtime or late spring, early summer. And it, earth is like solid and grounded and um, very much to do with the material world, but also very likes its things the way that it likes its things.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
Leo is fiery. It has spark. It has momentum to move forward. They're both considered fixed signs, so there's a steady, reliable
Mm. Huh.
constancy to your character in both of those signs. But yeah, that rising tells us a lot, and then it gets even juicier when we look to see the ruling planet of the sign. And in
Okay.
the lineage of astrology that I study and work with, it is the planets rather than the signs that are kind of the things we're most interested in. But I'll pause
All right.
there.
Well, that's great because now I want to ask you, I want to give you full permission to dork out a little bit
Thank you.
because you talked about that your academic background, like truly, Maggie, one of the things I most appreciate is I will look at other readings and I leave confused. And then you put something up on IG and I'm like, oh, that helps me make sense of it. So I do think you're a wonderful translator. And um, one of the things you have said a couple of times is us astrology is long, 3,000 years. There are different lineages. You said my lineage. And I just love you. Can you just like dork out a little bit? And maybe you could tell us what your lineage is versus kind of other major lineages people might know. I think people think astrology and they just think astrology,
Yeah.
right? Like it's, they don't distinguish. And so could you give us a little bit of a primer, Dr.
Sure.
Red?
Yeah. And then I'll also say that in terms of my own study, I'm like a baby astrologer, and the academic in me is like, you cannot claim expertise until you've been doing this for 30 years and have published
Sure.
35,000 articles. So I just gonna name that. Um,
Great.
so the traditional astrology is sort of an umbrella term that it's really more like 2,000 plus years. I maybe exaggerated a little bit on the 3,000 time. It's just a construct. But
Absolutely.
going back to Babylonian times, and then to like the time of Christ, and then um, you can go into Hellenistic and medieval and Arabic. All of those lineages or influences to the astrological kind of body of knowledge. So it's almost it's thousands of years worth of scholarship, worth of study, worth of people staring at the sky, which was
Mm,
the most exciting thing you can see at the
right.
time when there's no screens and there's no electric light. People were staring at the stars and making meaning from what was happening in the stars. And so traditional astrology is an umbrella term that uncovers all of those that I just named: Egyptian, Babylonian, Arabic, medieval, up through the Renaissance.
Okay.
So then you have, and much of that was uh, finally codified in Greek. And then those texts were largely, I won't say lost, but not utilized in modern times until early in the 1900s, when they were kind of rediscovered and translated into English. Um, and many other languages. And so then all of a sudden that opened up that style of astrology to a lot more students. In the meantime, astrology did reemerge at the time of sort of the spiritual awakening and Jungian psychology and depth psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what we sort of associate with modern astrology. So it's more that what you see in a chart are parts of yourself and it's your psyche. And traditional astrology would have it that those are people that you meet and events that take place in the life, and kind of influences or uh, kind of ways of being rather than parts of your
Mm-hmm.
psyche. So just kind of really
Oh,
different angles.
interesting.
Yeah,
Really different.
really different.
Okay. Wow. That's great. And then isn't there, and maybe this is in the traditional, maybe that you already mentioned this, but I think I've heard of like astrology that's based more in India and Pakistan. Like, isn't there like what is
Yes.
that called?
So that's Vedic astrology.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
traditional astrology is more closely related to Vedic. than modern is related
Okay.
to Vedic. So they both use the visible planets. Traditional and Vedic both use the visible planets rather than the modern planets that were able to be seen with a telescope. Um, and there's so the astrology that I practice and Vedic astrology both are focused on um, the sun and the moon, and then the five planets that we can see with the naked eye. And then
Okay.
and then most of us now incorporate the outer planets that can only be seen by a telescope, but those are really seen as kind of generational planets that are in a sign for long periods of time and influence us as a collective at a generational level rather than as an
Wow.
individual. Yeah.
Okay. So I feel I have two questions. One is kind of why the school you chose, like
Hmm.
what called to you about that? That's the first question. And the second question is if folks are like me and can get a little overwhelmed by the rigor of these systems, right? That's
Hmm.
actually, like you said, there's like, I mean, thousands of years of scholarship behind them, right?
Hmm.
So it's really fun to watch your favorite astrologer, like click on their website. But where would you recommend that people might start if they wanted to embrace the rigor of
Mm.
the schools of thought? So one is like, why did you pick the school that you're the lineage that called you? Or I mean, you might have been called, you might not have just picked it, but what was that story? And then where would people start if they were interested in kind of a more rigorous approach?
Yeah. So I did an apprenticeship program just over a year and a half ago, and it was um, broad and shallow. But I learned a lot, and it was drinking from a fire hose, and it like really got me to where I needed to be in a shorter period of time. Um, but I was very aware that I was like missing something. Like there was a depth. I've said that word like 35 times already today, but there was a depth that I was missing, and there was some scaffolding or structure that I
Uh-huh.
was missing. So I did some work around just trying to find somebody who was doing work similar to what I envisioned I wanted to do. I'm trained as a somatic coach. I really wanted to bring somatics into astrology. I wanted to be able to connect what we are seeing in charts and what we see in the sky with what we live in our bodies and what we experience in our bodies.
Mm,
So I
great.
found a woman who does somatic astrology, and I looked to see who she was had trained with. And it turned out that
Uh-huh.
she had trained with somebody I had just heard of through another source. And I was like, thank you, universe, for giving me all of these things at the same time and leading me to my teacher, Kelly Surtees. And Kelly is an awesome astrologer. She has studied with um, sort of the teachers that are well known in this world. She's a Hellenistic astrologer, and she is so clear and she is so simple, and she brings it back to
Mm,
basics over and over and over again. Um, and I love it. So that is the lineage that I'm in. That is why I chose it, was because it had this ability to um, fill in a lot of gaps for me. And I'll just say a little bit
uh-huh.
more about that. I was aware that I needed to understand more of the history in order to practice the techniques that I was using well, because there are techniques that are specific to their lineage.
Okay.
So if you think about it, I think it's maybe more accessible if you think about it in terms of yoga, right? Like yoga is this big thing that a lot of us practice
Mhm.
and know about. But there's Ashtanga and there's Vinyasa and there's
Yeah.
Hatha and there's all of these different branches. And so if
Mhm.
you're doing things, so there are things that are specific to that lineage. You know, Iyengar uses props, Ashtanga doesn't use props, as an
Mhm.
example. So if you're learning one style, you want to use the techniques that are consistent
Yeah.
with that
Yeah.
school of thought. And so, what
Right.
I was able to find with this umbrella of traditional astrology were really rooted practices that had a history, that were
Mhm.
contextualized in a very specific time and place, and whose techniques were properly aligned and, and came from that school of thought. So there was like
Great.
internal consistency, which just like blew my mind because it made it feel so much more accessible, and
Uh-huh.
it all made more sense because it wasn't this hodgepodge. Instead, it was like there is a reason behind all of the ways that we're doing what we're doing.
I really appreciate that. I mean, it certainly fits with what I know about you, but I think it could also be an entree into astrology itself. Like to know that it's not just, I mean, there just have been a number of things you've said that really ground it as a practice in a lot of ways. One is like, I think we kind of tend to do both romanticize ancient ways and then completely dismiss them,
Mhm.
right? So it's like, oh, thousands of years, like that builds some credibility, but then it's kind of like, yeah, but it's not science because you were just looking at the sky. But of course, this is how we developed as human beings, right? There was something both ineffable and able to be known, like holding that paradox. Of course, the sky, when we look at it, we can't fully understand it. And yet there are things we can know. And so
Mhm.
there's something really, um, it feels like it works in that tension of knowing and unknowing
Mhm.
that for me is almost always believable, right? It's when things are too certain and too known, I often don't trust.
Right.
Um, so it's like this kind of combination there. So there's like this ancient practice, and then there's like the thousands of years of scholarship, and then there's the internal coherence within the schools that you're talking about. That I think for folks who have not even a skeptical mind, but just a critical mind, that can be an on-ramp to know that once you get in, it's actually not just a catch as catch can, do whatever you want, think however you want. You like that theory, so you'll take that on. But there's actually some real internal, like a deep ancient practice with lots of scholarship that has an internal coherence, I think could be a real on-ramp to people to
Mhm.
astrology, um, that I don't know, maybe those in the astrology community know this, but certainly outside, as you say it, I'm like, oh, right. Like that would be that I could see that appealing
Yeah.
um, to people in a way that it may not just generally appeal to those of us who are like, that sounds kind of cool. Let me check it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing for me that has made it much more tangible and convincing, I guess, because I definitely consider myself to be pretty skeptical about things, is that
Mm-hmm.
it's also entirely aligned with nature. It is
Aha.
you're watching the moon get smaller and bigger. You're watching the
Aha.
seasons change. You're watching winter turn into spring. You're watching spring turn into summer. And each of those phases has to do with a calendar year. It's how we
Mm-hmm.
divide our time. So, in a way, astrology was developed as a tool for making sense of time and cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And you could look to the sky and know that when certain configurations are happening, that's when the floods happen. Okay, that's
Right.
important to
Right.
know for all of your farming practices to sustain your
Right.
civilization. Like, and when these configurations happen, that light is becoming less and less, and that you're going to need to harvest and you're going to need to preserve your
Aha.
food and you're going to need to get ready and have stores set aside for winter because it is going to get darker and darker. So
Right.
I think that part of it that is so grounding for me, and to be clear, I have very little earth in my chart. So grounding is a
Mm.
practice I am constantly working on. Um,
Okay.
uh, it's so grounding to just think of it as a tool for understanding the cycles of Earth and nature and what we're experiencing here on Earth.
Well, I mean, I like that. Like, I feel more and more convinced. And as you're speaking, though, Maggie, that makes me understand why it could be so threatening, right?
Mm,
If we have been taught by our religions or industrialization and or capitalism, right, that we are to have dominion over the earth, right, that we're not to actually cycle with the earth, that we're like to to have dominion and control the earth, then something like astrology, which gives us wisdom from the earth, then must have to be suppressed. That those two things cannot live together. And so it's kind of fundamentally a pretty threatening practice.
Yeah, and I was just reading today about how it really sort of fell out of regard because it was very much part of how uh, civilizations were run, how kings and queens knew what was happening with their
Hmm.
populations, how they decided to go to war. Like it was used for lots of different reasons for many hundreds of years. And then during the Enlightenment, it fell out of
Mm,
use. And so you have this period of enlightenment, which was this time when we
right.
thought man could control everything and
Right.
have control and dominion over the earth. And I think now we're in this time when we're seeing that the earth is also saying, yeah, no.
Yeah.
You we humans do have an impact on the earth, and the earth also is so much bigger than us. And then the
Right.
universe is so much bigger than the earth, and the earth is just this small part of that. And I think that coincides with the sort of rise in interest in astrology and the openness that people are feeling, and that I'm certainly seeing of people getting curious about, okay, what does what how is there a relationship between what's going on in the skies and what's going on here, and like how does that work, and tell me more about that.
Uh-huh.
And so there's this ancient saying of as above, so below, as within, so without. And
Mm,
I really believe in sort of the energetic truth of that, of like, if I am having a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of negative emotions, a lot of negative things come to me. And
mhm.
I mean, that's not all there is to it, but I do
Sure.
know that to be true. And that when I'm in a pretty good place on the inside, then the outside looks a lot better. And that same principle is reflected in sort of what's happening. It's all relational, it's all energetic, it's all vibration and how we all connect and influence each other.
Okay, then I have to ask you because we're on April 1st, 2026. It has been a very challenging spring
Hmm.
for many people that I know and
Yeah,
love. And I'm wondering what I like just wild. I feel like I'm talking to people every day and like something hard is happening in their life. And it feels like to a degree that was not true necessarily last April. And
yeah,
so if as above, so below, as within, as without, what would you tell us about what's happening at this time
yeah,
that might help explain like some of the challenges that seem really like I'm just talking about in the people I know and love. Certainly, I could talk about a greater social and political
yeah.
context. It just seems so hard right now. And is there an astrological explanation for that?
Sure, sure, sure. So we're right now just at the beginning of a new astrological year. So my hope is that we're starting to feel a little bit of lightness for the time being. But we did just wrap up a cycle that ended with the season of Pisces, which was mid February to mid March,
Mm,
late February to late March, about the 18th of February to like the 18th of March this time. Um,
okay.
Más o menos, like somebody can gut.
Yeah.
I don't remember those details, but um, and that is a mutable time. It's the end of winter. It's the end of winter season. It's a time of change and shifting energies. We had
Mm,
an eclipse. That's a time when, the sun and the moon block each other's light. We have eclipses two, sometimes three times a year. Um, the, that's a big energetic shift for us in that all of a sudden, if you imagine being an ancient person, you look up to the sky and like the light that you're used to seeing is gone,
right.
and it's being eaten, like the moonlight is being eaten away by the shadow of the sun, or vice versa, right? So you have this time where there's a time of of instability at the same time that it's Pisces season, which is also a season of instability. Mercury, which is our closest planet to Earth, and besides the moon, of course, um, from the perspective of Earth, when you look at Mercury and all the planets actually, sometimes they appear to be moving backwards from the naked
Mhm.
eye, and because of the way that the Earth orbits the sun, and the other planets orbit the sun. Whole Can have a whole science lesson about this, but sometimes from our perspective, it looks like the planets are moving
Uh-huh.
backwards. These are also destabilizing times. So, astrologically, these three things were happening. We had a planet of war also moving into this sign of instability. I happened to
Okay.
be traveling in India during all of this.
Mhm.
The United States went to war in Iran.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all of the transportation systems were like shutting down where I was. You couldn't
Wow.
We had colleagues who were coming to this yoga retreat who couldn't get there because the planes were all being diverted and said, so it was like this
Yes.
very real life manifestation of these things that were
Uh-huh.
sort of called for in the astrological weather, if that makes sense. So, to kind of try to get to the answer to your question, there was so much going on astrologically during that period of time. We also this year have had a number of planets that are really distant planets that move very slowly, changing signs. So, um, just to back up a little bit, last year, Pluto, who takes 20 years to move through a sign, moved into a new sign. Neptune takes 14 years to move through a sign, it just moved into Aries. Um, Uranus takes 7 years. It just moved into a new sign and then out, and then it'll be moving back in. So you have these planets that take many years to change, all changing last year and this year.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that just is very destabilizing.
Okay.
And just to kind of ground all of that, and kind of think about what that means in terms of our experience is that we move from a time of there being a lot of energy in water and earth signs. So
Mhm.
water is very intuitive, it's very creative, it's very emotional and feeling. Earth is very grounded. It is of this 3D realm. We're moving into air and fire. Air is very cerebral. It's very mental energy. It's a lot of thoughts all at the same time.
Okay.
Fire is fire. It's energy. It's moving fast. It's burning things. So as
Uh-huh.
a collective, from we're moving from those energies of earth and water into these energies of fire and air, and we're gonna feel that. And I this moment we're in right now sure feels airy and fiery.
Yes, absolutely. That is so helpful. I have two different questions, and they go in two completely opposite directions. So let's see where we go. One of my questions, Maggie, is why I listen to you as an astrologer is because I feel like again, like that, like what you just said makes a lot of sense to me. It's clear, A- um, and sometimes I have the sense as I try to comb through by myself that there's always a lot happening. And so I'm kind of like, well, if there's always a lot happening, how do I know what's what and what's causing what? And it's kind of like if something is always happening, then how is that different from kind of just like normal life? So like that's one question I want to ask you. And then the other question I want to ask you is what are the limits? Where do you come up against the limits of astrology where there are things that it can't explain in our movements or what's happening? Or well, yeah, like how I'm just curious, what are the limits you come up against in this particular field of knowledge and practice? So one is like, yeah, I think you got it. Like the first one's like, hey, if something's always happening, how do I comb through what's important? And maybe that is a question and error. Maybe something is not always happening. And then the other is what are the limits that you found? It's
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think It does feel, certainly when you're on Instagram, that something is always happening, and how do you
Yeah.
discern what is significant for you?
Yeah.
I think knowing your chart helps, like knowing where your primary placements are and how they are in relationship to what's happening. Um, so that's like a little bit, that's like phase two. That's not phase one of like you're just dipping your toe in. That's like you already know a little
Uh-huh.
something, and now you can see
Great.
how it all, because it's all about understanding what's happening in astrology is all about relationships. It's relationships between planets and how they're communicating to each other and what function they each serve, and how those functions may be working in concert or in disharmony, right?
Great.
So I think prior to that, it's knowing that the reason it all something is always happening is that all of us planets are rotating around the sun. They're constantly moving. They're constantly shifting, and the zodiac and is constantly shifting as well. So yeah, like movement's happening. We're constantly
Right.
revolving.
Uh-huh. Great.
um,
Okay.
when is it
That's great.
significant? Yeah, just sort of scientifically, it helps
Yeah.
understand that. Like, yep,
Absolutely.
things are going to keep moving. There's a great app called Stellarium that allows you to see how it's all moving. And so you can see the stars, you can see the planets, you can see Earth, and you're like, oh, look at us just like cruising around in these orbits.
I know you have more to say, but I just want to pause and say like that even that I mean obviously I know that, but even applying that to this field of practice and thought is just really helpful. And also for me and my own cosmology really grounds it in the divine feminine and goddess who is movement, is motion. Of course there's always something happening. She's
Yeah.
moving at all points of time. Like that's not so, yeah, you just like, yeah, you just did something that really landed for me
Yeah.
there, Maggie. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Okay, I'll let you go on.
Yeah. Um, I think the other thing is to look at the sky. So just kind of related to what you were just
Mm.
describing. Um, I can't remember when this was. It was in the last few weeks. I was really fascinated because where I live, I could see Jupiter and the moon right next to each other, like all the time. And I was like, look at that.
Oh,
Look at that big old planet. Jupiter's very bright and big. And so Jupiter's significance has to do with being
uh,
bright and big. And so kind of getting to know the
okay.
qualities of the
Mm,
planets um, just helps you with the understanding. It's not one of the things that's really fun about astrology is that it's not that it all makes sense. Like the moon waxes and wanes and changes shape all the time. Guess what? It's about change. It's it
right.
receives the
Hmm.
light. It reflects the light and receives light from the sun. It's about receptivity.
Uh-huh.
So the meaning and qualities of these things aren't just kind of made up out of thin air.
Right.
They're connected to the qualities of that they naturally possess and that are also connected to
Great.
mythology. And you start to see that the stories like all just click after you look at it for
Great.
a while. So looking at the sky, I think, is another really great way. Then, in terms of
Beautiful.
discerning like all of the stuff that's happening, um,
Mm-hmm.
I think knowing how quickly the planets move is helpful. So this is another sort of science tip: is like the bodies that are closest to us on Earth are going to move fastest. The ones that are farther away move the slowest. So if you hear about Neptune changing signs, Neptune's really far away. So Neptune's changing, that's a pretty big deal. The moon
Uh-huh.
changing signs happens every 2.5 days. Not a big deal.
Uh-huh. Okay, got it. Oh,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. Also, okay, I know I asked you another question. And I really want to get you to be able to answer that as well. But that is even like it's just so common sense and also linked to science in the way, that just kind of with many people gives credibility. But I'm thinking now about the separation between astrology and astronomy, which actually like what you're talking about is so much astronomy,
Yeah.
right? It's just like so it's kind of like in our heads we make them separate, but there's I mean, I understand that there's a whole field of study in astronomy, but
Sure.
but there is something that you're talking about that is like what we as human beings can know and see and just verify with our senses, with our just innate knowing that helps us understand what's happening
Yeah.
there, right?
Yes.
Farther away, slower, closer, faster. You know what I mean? That just makes such good common sense to me, and it feels like since you can check with your own body,
Yeah.
um and your own experience and your kind of lived understanding of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's the only way I think this stuff lands, really,
Mhm.
for me, is that it needs to land in my body and in my, like, felt senses,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the big hurdles that I got over when I was studying this is and when I first became exposed is that, like, "Oh, yeah, it does do that. It does land for me."
Uh-huh.
I have one more thing to say about how to discern, and then I will answer your question. And so, the other thing about how to discern what's important for us as individuals is if you know the planet that rules your rising sign, that is the planet that uh, the ancients called it the helmsman. It's the planet that is leading your life. It is the planet that is
Mm.
most closely associated with you in your birth chart.
Okay.
So, whatever that planet is, and there are celestial body because it could be the moon or the sun.
Ah, okay.
Whatever planet rules your sign, and it's easy enough to find just Googling it. Whatever planet rules your rising sign, pay attention to what that planet is doing. So, you as a Leo rising,
Mm.
you're ruled by the sun. And so, just knowing what season the sun is in. So, the sun is in Aries right now. What are the qualities of Aries? Aries is like youthful exuberance and also like a warrior spirit. It's a
Mm.
time of action. It's a time of of sort of moving forward with what you desire. Like I kind of keep making the same gesture with
Mhm.
my hand of like moving forward. And it's also fiery, so it can be sort of it can scorch the things around it.
Uh-huh.
And the next season is Taurus season, which is a totally different vibe. So you move like, okay, what sign is the sun in, and what's
Uh-huh.
happening with the sun since you're a Leo rising? If somebody is ruled by Mercury, they want to see where Mercury is in their chart. In the sky at the current time. I'm like, okay, what's Mercury up to? Is Mercury in a good place? Is Mercury in a constrained place? What does that mean for me right now? How fast does Mercury move, etc.
Uh-huh. Great. And like you said, you can find some of these things out fairly simply. I mean,
Yes.
obviously, I think everyone should come to you for a reading.
Thank you.
But until they do, there are some things that they can get into. Okay, so tell me about the limits. What
Yes.
are the limits you're finding?
Yeah, I think for me, the limits are my own right now and my
Mhm.
lack of
Uh-huh.
knowledge or my burgeoning knowledge in certain areas. One of the things about astrology that is quite popular and powerful has to do with timing and prediction.
Uh-huh.
And that is an area I've studied and that I do use, but there's so much depth there. And
Okay.
so you can really get into like how to time specific you can use astrology to decide like, okay, when should I launch this new business? When should I get married? When are the sort of the most auspicious times for taking certain types of actions? Um, but in terms of limits, I really think it has to do with the fact that we can't know everything because at the end of
Yeah.
the day, everybody has free will, and all that we see in a chart is potential. And
Uh-huh.
your potential can choose to like live into the higher octaves of a certain energy or into the shadow sides of that energy. And your circumstances and the social norms and your life events and everything that is happening around you may is likely able to be seen by very skilled astrologers. They can see all of that.
Uh-huh.
Um, and you still are making the choices.
Okay, let's I just want to go push into that just a little bit because
Yeah.
as you did the reading with me, what I thought was so interesting is two things. One is that you didn't pretend complete neutrality in charts. You were kind of like, some charts are harder and some are easier, like that's just kind of the case. But you also made the point with like, that's kind of not destiny. You've seen people with hard charts like thriving and resilient and brilliant and like
Mhm.
just kind of living their best life, with people that have maybe more positive charts really struggling or not being resilient. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, it sounds like free will. Like, I feel like you were going there, but I'd just love to hear you talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. I think that reality that you just described of what I've seen in charts is very much the same as people we know, even if you don't think about astrology. You know people
Hmm.
who've had really sort of like who have secure attachment and who have um, a, a roof over their head and food in their mouths and a really good job and um, they have all the markers of success or whatever and they're
Yeah.
miserable.
Right.
And then you
Right.
know people who've had really non-secure attachment, avoidance strategies, whatever. We can use all sorts of
Yes.
therapy talk, and who thrive. And you also know those
Hmm.
same people who don't,
Right.
who have not been able to extract themselves from
Right.
their circumstances. And just to throw
Right.
in the fourth category, the people who have had all the markers of success, I keep putting in air quotes, and who are so appreciative of their lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
So that whole spectrum exists, and we really do. I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, I still believe that our mindset really does matter and how we
Right.
choose to um, uh, handle the things that come our way um, is really powerful.
Yeah. Well, I love where you ended because I was just going to go, well, and people are going to people. That's just how it is. You know what I mean? But I actually prefer what you said about mindsets, and that feels like a maybe a more gracious way to talk about it. Just like two more questions, Maggie.
Sure.
Um, One is that you come from a background of like organizational development, equity, of kind of moving a collective of systems work, right? That's like a place we found each other, is like really
Hmm.
thinking in systems. And I'm wondering how the astrology frame fits into that or doesn't. Is it a new frame?
Oh gosh, I have not thought about that at all. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that I think I'm better suited to one-on-one work and to
Mm-hmm.
changing and to helping people on their paths of transformation as individuals. So that's like in
Uh-huh.
terms of my own path and like
Uh-huh.
how I contribute to those systems. In
Great.
terms of like how astrology kind of interfaces with systems and structures, there's this fascinating woman named Pamela Gregory who's out of the UK, and she does a type of astrology called Ori astrology. It doesn't matter what it's called. She does a type of astrology that is all about like what's happening right now. Mundane astrology is another way to describe to talk about it.
Okay.
I think what she does is mundane, not Ori. So let's just scratch that part.
Okay.
She's talking about what is happening right now geopolitically in our current systems and structures, and she often will look up the chart of a country or of an institution. So she,
Okay.
like, looked up the Federal Reserve chart recently, and she's looked up the
Uh-huh.
chart for, um, obviously for given countries, but also for, like, NATO and, the UN,
Uh-huh.
and she looks at those charts, and she sees what's happening for those as entities, and she has a lot to say about them, and she's fascinating, and if you wanna go down
Wow.
that rabbit hole and she looks at a lot of fixed stars and, like, her knowledge of mythology is also vast and she's fascinating. Um, so I think that it's just like we are systems and systems are us, right? Like we build the
Yeah.
systems and we also live within the systems. It's this that that we are individuals and we are part of something bigger shows up in astrology, both as we look at collective things, institutions, a given day, uh, governments, their leaders. You see, I'm sure lots of people who are listening are probably familiar with Chani Nicholas, the astrologer.
Yeah.
She also is a traditional astrologer who uses whole sign houses, the same type of astrology that I practice, but she's very focused on what is happening
Yeah.
geopolitically and
Yeah.
has a lot to say about that. So I think that um, just as individuals are parts of systems and build systems and create them and get to dismantle them, so too can astrology look at both us as
Yeah.
individuals and as at our structures.
That makes so much sense to me, and again, reflecting back on what you said earlier about as above, so below, as within, so without, this might seem like a strange question, I wasn't gonna ask it, but I was just with the Luminosity folks, and we just did a visualization where we imagined our body as the night sky and like these different points
Mhm.
of our body as constellations. And I was curious, that just made me ask, is there any mapping of the night sky onto the body that you're aware of?
Yeah. There's a whole field of medical astrology, and I've
Okay.
learned a little bit about that. And the that it was astrology was often used and still is used, but more back in the day, um, to diagnose maladies, to predict the fertility, to talk about how to deal with like how to deal with congestion. Like, is it happening in your throat? Is it happening in your gut? Is it, and there's planets that are associated with all of those different parts of self. So yes. Yeah.
Well, that just makes sense. I was like, "Oh, yeah, just 2 hours ago, we were laying and imagining ourselves, like, expanding to the night sky and then bringing the night sky back into our bodies," and I'm like, "Oh, of course," when you said, "I'm a system and, like, around me a system and here's a system," I'm like, "Of course they are connected." It's kind of like, what's your level of going in? What's the scale you happen to be working at?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that idea of the scale. I also have been thinking a lot about in terms of the goddesses and goddess work, about how the stories of different goddesses correlate to the story of different planets or different constellations and
Oh.
stars, and how we see those stories repeated in so many different cultures and in so many different periods of time, and they all map onto the stories of traditional astrology.
Okay, Maggie. Well, now you have to come back. I mean, we have to have that conversation. We've never touched that conversation.
No.
That feels really fascinating with me. I would love to talk with you more about that.
Yeah.
Intuitively, it makes sense, but I just want to know more. But we do probably need to wrap. So I just have two last questions for you. One is there a practice people who are interested in astrology, um, is there any a practice that you might suggest for folks to become more in tune or to look at, or yeah, just a small on-ramp perhaps for folks?
Really, it's following the moon and sun cycles. So knowing what signs the moon and sun are in, and actually not
Mm,
even the sign for the moon. The moon changes so quickly, but really the phases of the moon. So which phase are we
okay.
in?
Okay.
The phase of the moon says a lot about what we are up to energetically and like what we have
Mm,
capacity for energetically, especially the relationship with the current moon phase and our natal moon phase. But that's not a gateway, I understand. But just like following the moon, like tonight we have a full
okay.
moon, in 2 weeks we're gonna have a new moon. What does it mean to be in a balsamic moon phase? What does it mean to be in a waxing gibbous phase? And just kind of getting to know the moon. And then the sun. I write a monthly newsletter about the sun. Every time the sun is going to change its sign, I talk about what that means. Um, because each of those 28, 29-day periods is really distinct. And so what do we have capacity for in those different times, and what is that time kind of calling us to do? And I think that one's probably the easiest just because it's
Okay,
only every 28 days. Like you don't have to think about it too
that's
often.
great.
So yeah, that practice of just getting to know that.
And so folks can find your newsletter at your website, continuous-revolution.com, right? So they
Yes.
could sign up. It's right on your front page. They can sign up for your newsletter. That would be a small practice to get in to that 28-day cycle would be lovely. Other places that people can find you, Maggie?
Yeah, on Instagram, I'm Dr. Maggie Red. I've been real quiet there lately, but I have an intention of firing that up again as we're into this Aries season. Um, and my email is also on the continuous-revolution.com website, and you can connect there.
Great.
Pretty easy to find and happy to connect with people, even for just a little, what is it that you're up to? Get to know you call or something like that.
Wonderful. Well, I have no doubt if people reach out, they're going to want to. The reading with you was amazing. I, you know, I, you record it, you sent me, follow up on it. I just thought it was really brilliant. I've thought about it a lot since just because I can't remember my moon doesn't mean that it's not important. I'm pretty sure it's Sagittarius, but I don't want to say anything too wild. So it would be great for people to be able to find you. I'm wondering, like, last question. You and I have had quite a long relationship and it's, friendly and casual. But as you came on to this podcast, you might have felt a little trepidation. And I'm wondering how you feel on this side of our.
I feel good. I feel excited. I feel really grateful to get to just explore this stuff. I really do love talking about all of this. And I really love the chance to try to make it make sense. I think that I,
That's so good.
I never would have thought that this tool would have been so powerful for me. Like, this was not on my radar. I mean, I kind of casually looked at astrology for many, many years, but
Yeah.
it was never on my radar to become an astrologer. And even when I signed up for my first classes, I was like, well, I'm just trying to learn something. And then to now, like, find so much fulfillment and so much sense making through this
Mm,
tool. Like, there are lots of tools for that. I'm not saying this is the only one,
yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
so grateful to have found it and just to get a chance to share about it. So thank you for your openness and your
Oh.
curiosity. And I love that you don't remember all the parts. I don't remember. I don't either. And that's
Well,
okay.
you know what? Here I am, a postmenopausal woman with the memory of a goldfish.
Hmm.
And so, you know what? You sent me a write up. I don't have to remember. I can actually go look at it again. And that is amazing. And, it's interesting, not that I have any baggage around astrologers, but I'm like, oh, yeah, Maggie's an astrologer. You're all the other things too. But like, it's like, Maggie's like she who studies the cosmos. That's actually what we're saying in a lot of ways. So I love it. Thank you so much. I feel like you just like, and we've had multiple conversations, but I feel like you just like kind of like blew it open for me today and really increased my understanding in really significant ways. And it's just so lovely to have you here.
Aw, thank
And
you. And yay.
I really am. I am really going to have you back. We have to talk about the goddesses and the planets and that move. Like that is, I am so down.
Yeah,
So
that'd be fun. Thank you, Tuesday.
thank you so much, Maggie. It's so good to be with you. Thank you, listeners. There's a thing here where you're supposed to say, rate, review, all those things. I would like, yeah, whatever you can do to support this podcast is great, including and mostly just forwarding this episode to folks who you think would be interested. So thank you, everyone. We'll be back in a few weeks.